I've been making the case on this channel, along with other astute observers, that nationalism is rising. We are swinging from the lower left quadrant of the political compass to the upper right quadrant. We are going from the self-indulgent, the postmodern, the disorder, the chaotic, and people are craving order. And we are doing this both politically and culturally. It's almost as if we have plumbed the depths of what nihilism can bring. We've seen the broken homes. We've seen what happens if you end a 10-year marriage and go out and try and run around and date the world. What happens to the children? What happens to your life? It's never as good as it seems. And so people are turning back to tradition. There was no happiness in chaos. And as this pendulum swings, and pendulums do not undercorrect. If you look at, and I've used the example of stock prices and the tech bubble, look at Cisco Systems. There was a huge run-up, and there was all this madness, all this chaos, all this, it made you question what reality you were in. And then valuations returned to normal, and it was over 20 years before it even approached its previous value. And so once this pendulum swings, and it will swing further right than anybody now can imagine, people are rejecting globalism on a grand scale. Why not nationalism? And why don't we follow a clear-cut set of rules? Not some distant rulers in a far-off centralized land that make all our decisions from the top down. Why don't we just follow the Constitution as the founders intended? And people are getting fed up with this relativistic nonsense like Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland, where a word means exactly what I want a word to mean. If I can't win an argument, if I can't make a case, if I don't like your ideas, I'll just take an old word that's a bad word, and I'll redefine it, and you will be that thing. And then I don't have to debate you, and then I don't have to argue. This wordsmithing nonsense has allowed them to at least attempt to just define their political opponents out of existence. And we see the chaos that this unleashes. Words need to have a very definite and defined meaning. Words mean what the dictionary says they mean. And this desire of a return to order is exemplified very clearly in the Second Amendment March in Virginia. Protesting yet another round of draconian anti-gun, anti-constitutional laws, an estimated 22,000 people showed up in Virginia, causing the blackface-wearing Ralph Northam. What's with Democrats and wearing blackface? It's really strange. Anyway, he had to declare a state of emergency and ban guns from the Capitol Square because there was militiamen, there was ordinary Americans, people came from all over the country, and this rally was just massive. President Trump tweeted his support. He said, "The Democratic Party in the great Commonwealth of Virginia are working hard to take away your Second Amendment rights. This is just the beginning. Don't let it happen. Vote Republican in 2020. And this is another encouraging thing you see. Virginia sheriffs also chose to march with the protesters, and one told a reporter he would not be enforcing any new gun control laws because they would be unconstitutional. And we're seeing this all over the country, even here in Washington state. A lot of the sheriffs from outlying counties have said, we're not going to enforce these laws. But of course, the leftists have child soldiers on their side, like David Hogg, who wrote, Virginia is in a state of emergency because white supremacists and Nazis are using their Second Amendment rights to shut down the First Amendment rights of students, veterans, and clergy. Tweet out a video with your support for laws that protect kids, not guns. Hashtag I stand with Virginia. I don't know where he gets this veterans and clergy thing, or even students really. And you can see here he's taking words and redefining them so that he can call people he disagrees with bad names. It's David Hogg in Wonderland. And so, sticking with this idea that nationalism is rising and people are getting sick of globalism, I want to contrast this with the latest Women's March, which the DC police report was that the Women's March was 100 times smaller than previous years. Seems like even globalism has fair weather fans. The first Women's March, which took place in DC after Trump was inaugurated, had an estimated almost 500,000 people, according to the New York Times. According to the DC police's estimate of 100 times less people, that means only about 5,000 showed up to march in 2020, which means a number of things. Maybe most of these women just went out and got jobs, realized a good economy is pretty nice, and are now complaining that their taxes are too high. But I think in part, people like to be on the winning team, and for a long time, it just seemed like globalism was winning. And so people wanted to cheer on and welcome their new overlords. And now it seems there's a new sheriff in town. And all of a sudden, nobody wants to be out there on the losing team. Nobody wants to be a loser. And so this has been a truly grassroots movement. This hasn't been an astroturfed grassroots movement like you read a news story and they say Twitter responds or internet responds. And then they just cherry pick a bunch of comments that support their preconceived conclusions. And this is, even big banks now are beginning to take notice. And this is where you see the tide really begin to shift, because a lot of what has fueled this globalist nonsense is there's a lot of big money, Soros money or billionaire money, that is putting the wind into the sails of the woke Twitter crowd. And what they don't realize is their voices are carrying much further than they ordinarily would, because rich people think this is what the world wants to hear. But now, here are Bank of America's top 10 investing themes to watch over the next decade. Bank of America says, the coming decade will be, quote, unlike any before it, as the world's social, environmental, political, and economic systems face escalating challenges. Among the themes to watch are peak globalization, recession risk, demographic shifts, automation advancements, and the rise in moral capitalism. So going back to my bubble thesis here for globalism, Bank of America is saying we have hit peak everything. Bank of America says globalization has already peaked, which means that over the next decade, there will be a greater focus on all things local. They say the 1981 to 2016 era of unchecked flow of goods, people, and capital is coming to an end, catalyzed by the widespread recognition that while globalization has meant lower consumer prices, it has also meant slower growth, precarious employment, and social disruption. The firm anticipates that while at first disruption in the global flow of things will increase the cost of doing business, eventually it will lead to a rebalancing that will raise productivity and set the global economy on a path to higher sustainable growth. So nationalism is better than globalism in every way imaginable. It continues, countries will develop explicit national industrial policies and boost spending on R&D to foster local innovation, protect nascent industries, and shield national champions from hostile foreign takeovers. Within a more nationalistic backdrop, investors should opt to own real assets like commodities, real estate, and precious metals, as well as infrastructure and defense names. As things shift closer to home, small cap and value stocks look better positioned than large cap and growth stocks. And I want to stress, just because Bank of America says it is going to happen doesn't mean they're right. They have no more crystal ball than the rest of us. But it's interesting now that big money is beginning to at least come around to the idea that nationalism is here to stay. And this leads to a whole new paradigm, because the big money that has so far been pushing conservatives down has been silencing their voices when they realize The core of their business, their viability, depends on people that are going to be nationalistic, people that want things closer to home. They have rejected this globalist idea. These people didn't get rich because they're stupid, and they really don't have any high-minded ideals. Maybe some of them, but in general, it's about making money. And so if nationalism is the way it goes, nationalism is the way it goes. And so I think what you'll see, there's a lot of what's called advertiser unfriendly, which basically translates to conservative these days. And they're going to realize it's actually the woke left that is advertiser unfriendly. More and more people begin to grasp, either through firsthand knowledge or maybe people smart enough to read and understand things, that get woke, go broke is a real phenomenon. It's just an astroturf movement. Nobody actually believes in this stuff, except maybe 1 to 5% of the population. It's a very thin but vocal minority. One of the things it's going to be really funny to watch is a bunch of companies and people you would never expect get real smart, real fast when it comes to the virtues of nationalism and the evils of globalism, once they sense that the winds of political change have turned permanently. And we can see this now manifesting at the highest levels of the political spheres. President Donald Trump told the world leaders assembled at the World Economic Forum in Davos they should all embrace economic nationalism, and pointed to America's success as proof of that. And here he urges other nations, for their own good, to throw off the suicidal failure of globalism and embrace economic nationalism. He says, America's newfound prosperity is undeniable, unprecedented, and unmatched anywhere in the world. America achieved this stunning turnaround not by making minor changes to a handful of policies, but by taking a whole new approach, centered entirely on the well-being of the American worker. Every decision we make on taxes, trade, regulation, energy, immigration, education, and more is focused on improving the lives of everyday Americans. We are determined to create the highest standard of living that anyone can imagine, and right now, that is what we're doing for our workers, the highest in the world. And we're determined to ensure that working and middle class reap the largest gains. A nation's highest duty is to its own citizens. Honoring this truth is the only way to build faith and confidence in the market system. And so I like how the Breitbart article sums this up. They say, in other words, they need to stop worrying about world opinion, because world opinion is a trap that only enriches the super wealthy, a trap that says you have to destroy your own country from within, with the refugees and illegal immigrants who steal working class jobs, depress working class wages, and dilute your culture. Trump continues, only when the governments put their own people first will people be fully invested in their national future. In the United States, we are building an economy that works for everyone, restoring the bonds of love and loyalty that unite citizens and empowers nations. Today, I hold up the American model as an example to the world of a working system of free enterprise that will produce the most benefits for the most people in the 21st century and beyond. A pro-worker, pro-citizen, pro-family agenda demonstrates how a nation can thrive when its communities, its companies, its government work together for the good of the whole nation. He also took a parting shot at the globalists' favorite tool, which is hiding behind environmentalism to get their policy deeds accomplished. He said, we must reject the perennial prophets of doom and their predictions of the apocalypse. They are heirs of yesterday's foolish fortune tellers. He recalled false scientific predictions of overpopulation, mass starvation, and an end of oil in past decades. And let me add global cooling as well. He goes on, these alarmists always demand the same thing: absolute power to dominate, transform, and control every aspect of our lives. We will never let radical socialists destroy our economy, wreck our country, or eradicate our liberty. And so, as you read the news, as you go through your day, just pay attention to things like this as they pop up, because as I'm making the case here, we're swinging back to the quadrant of order, the quadrant of organization, and pendulums don't undercorrect. This new paradigm will manifest in ways that seem impossible to those of us watching this today. Because love it or hate it, support it or oppose it, nationalism is rising.
I see something long absent in the sunken faces of passers-by. A glimmer of hope.